On this channel, we've talked about our fair share of dark topics, and today I have a story of loss, of sacrifice, and of retribution, and one mysterious line from a gossip stone that ties it all together. Hello there friendos, Newbornkilik here, welcoming you back to another awesome Zelda-related theory, but this time it is on a ROM hack called The Legend of Zelda The Sealed Palace. Zelda the Sealed Palace is a fan-made ROM hack of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. You don't need to know too much about the original game, just understand that this is a fully fledged ROM hack and essentially its own full-length game made with many of the assets from Ocarina of Time. On your quest for the third spiritual stone, the Zora Sapphire, said to be in the possession of a mysterious masked artist, you find yourself approaching a mansion on top of a snowy mountain. A mansion that is cut off from the rest of the world in the most literal fashion. The outside is cold and unwelcoming, requiring you to make dangerous jumps as you approach. As you travel through a small graveyard to reach the manor, you find that the doors to the intimidating building are frozen shut, and you are forced to enter through the basement. However, as you enter the basement, you are met with an atmosphere that isn't necessarily dangerous or hostile, and in fact, the music of the area sounds a bit warmer than you might anticipate, albeit with a hint of sorrow and even confusion. Music is a powerful tool in conveying the setting and mood of an area, and at first it was a bit confusing hearing this piece in a place with such a cold exterior, but we'll come to find that this score makes perfect sense given the dark story of this place. As you explore the house, everything seems almost stuck in time. Large and small skulltulas alike have started to take the house, implying that it's been in this state for quite some time. Upstairs you can find multiple beds, and downstairs you can find a table made for a family, along with a whole shelf dedicated to what looks to be alcohol, all partially consumed of course. All in all, it just seems to be an abandoned house. That is, until you find the occupant of the house. Stuck in some sort of trance, interacting with him, Navi will say that he is sleeping, but any attempts to wake him will prove fruitless. Approaching the painting nearby while carefully stepping over what we can assume to be paint, right? The world begins to glow red, and you are suddenly thrown into the nightmare. As you navigate through the nightmare, it seems to bear resemblance to Ganondorf's castle. Given that this is Link's nightmare essentially, this makes quite a bit of sense. You will encounter all manner of horrible enemies such as Redeads, Wall Masters, Floor Masters, and everything that we hated as a child. As you're attacking these various terrifying enemies, you might notice something is a bit strange with the walls. Is that blood coming out of the walls? Navigating the creepy corridors, eventually you will find the trusty boomerang, which can be taken to the outside world oddly enough, proving that the horrors in here are in fact grounded in reality. Exploring the nightmare further, you'll find doors that cannot be unlocked. This is a subtle thing, but it does a lot to put you off balance, as the presence of a locked door implies the presence of a key, surely, and something potentially important behind it. The presence of a key that you will likely spend quite a while trying to find. But as you search for the key, things are about to take a terrible turn. Entering an unassuming nearby door, you are met with a seemingly innocent hallway overlooking the main room of the nightmare. On the far side, you are drawn to a small chest that likely contains the key you need to progress. However, as you continue down the hallway, things begin to go dark. You re-emerge on the other side of the hallway and can finally see the nightmare for what it truly is. Thinking back on the bleeding walls, that was a hint that maybe this nightmare was far more twisted than it seems. Things are starting to make sense now. This is, quite literally, a living nightmare. This one hallway subverted every expectation that I had, leading to a truly chilling experience. For context, I always had a deep hatred for Jabu Jabu's belly. The thought of walls and floors made of flesh has always been something that deeply disturbed me on some sort of primal level. Unfortunately, you'll come to find that as grotesque as this nightmare is, what happened in the real world is much worse. In many ways, this is sort of an alternate half of the original level. And in this twisted nightmare, we find Princess Ruto standing on the balcony with a look of eerie pleasure on her face. It's almost as if she's enjoying this torment that you're being put through. pressing on through the nightmare and defeating parasitic tentacles with your newly found boomerang, eventually defeating the boss. You are released from the nightmare. You are given the Zora Sapphire by Ruto, and she says, "Well, that was fun, so I guess I'll reward you." When you ask for the Zora Sapphire, she says, "My mother gave it to me and said I should only give it to the man who would become my husband. I didn't have a chance, but I'm sure you'll find someone to give this to." This passage is extremely dark and puts the whole area into perspective. In this story, Princess Ruto is essentially a malevolent spirit that enjoys playing with their victims in their nightmares. She seems to have very ill feelings toward the masked artist. However, I believe this man is no innocent being. The few NPCs throughout the game that speak of this place will call it a mysterious place with many secrets. The old lady on the cliff even expresses interest in making potions with some of the interesting things she might find in that strange mansion, mentioning that she can't see very well anymore, but her nose works just fine, which makes me wonder what smell could be so powerful as to draw her attention from all that distance. Maybe the flesh of a young princess. Who's to say? When communicating with Saria, she states that King Zora allowed the masked artist to borrow the spiritual stone of water, the Zora Sapphire. Given that we find that very stone here, it is implied that this man is the masked artist. This is confirmed by a woman in town stating the following: "I hear that up in the mountains there lives an artist that made those eerie masks." This, of course, is in reference to the 3 masks that you can find inside of the museum. Admittedly, nothing's really adding up yet, and I was about to scrap this video until I found this unassuming gossip stone, a bit off the beaten path, that states, "They say that the Zora Sapphire can animate even a lifeless mask." Okay, that's kind of weird to just mention. However, thinking deeply about these words, I believe we may have just found the final piece that brings everything together. I present to you the dark timeline of events in the Snow Peak Manor. This masked artist fellow had a loving family of some kind, maybe children, maybe parents and grandparents, as we see a large table enough for a family and multiple beds in the upstairs area. One way or another, they're not around anymore. Maybe he drove them off with a drinking problem, as we see many half-empty bottles of alcohol. Maybe he became too involved in his art. Or, given the area they live in, they may have also perished due to the cold. As I mentioned earlier, they are literally cut off from the outside world. The bridge outside is completely destroyed. The only thing connecting them to the outside world is gone. How can they get supplies, food, anything of the sort? I think this is the most likely thing that probably happened. They likely just perished. Slowly, hopelessly. The masked artist, heartbroken at the loss of his family, may have slowly descended into some sort of madness and looked for any way to cope with the pain he was feeling, driving him further and further into the bottle, in hopes of forgetting his family that he had to bury just outside his house. Some point later, the masked artist must have asked King Zora either for assistance, or perhaps he was under commission, maybe to paint the Zora Sapphire. Hence why the king would allow him to borrow it in the first place. Perhaps he was allowed to stay near the king during his commission, or perhaps the king had his daughter Ruto deliver the Zora Sapphire to the man at his home. Though allowing the princess to deliver the stone in such treacherous conditions is highly unlikely. Regardless of how this happened, the masked artist must have found out about the power of the Zora Sapphire in this world. He wanted it for himself, potentially to bring his family back, as hinted at by the echoes of the Gossip Stone. I believe that he created masks for his family's spirit, as we can see in the graveyard that none of these graves release pose when bothered, which are generally seen to be the spirits of the ones that have passed, meaning that there are no spirits under these graves. Everything lined up perfectly for the man to bring his family back from the dead, but there was only one thing standing in the way. Princess Ruto wouldn't want to give up the stone, and the masked artist had 2 choices: either to become the man that the princess would marry, or take it by force. Given the splatters of blood on the floor in front of the painting, it's fair to assume that Princess Ruto probably died during this confrontation, turning into a malevolent spirit that we see within the nightmare itself. She then trapped her murderer in an endless living nightmare as a form of vengeance. Alternately, he was staying with the Zora family, or at least went out to go get the sapphire, which seems to make a bit more sense, as it was implied that the king willingly allowed the masked artist to borrow the Zora sapphire. While there, he may have seen an opportunity to kill Princess Ruto and stole the Zora Sapphire, escaping into the night, never to be seen again. In this instance, the red substance on the floor seems more symbolic for the blood of an innocent that the cruel man has spilled. Admittedly, both of these concepts do have their flaws, but I think it's pretty clear that somehow Ruto managed to form a grudge for this guy and is keeping him trapped in this living nightmare. It could be that some sort of sacrifice was needed to tie the souls to these different masks, and Princess Ruto was just the most readily available. After all, just inside the nightmare, there's a gossip stone that states in order to create art, it takes blood, sweat, and tears. The tears shed for a family loved and lost. The sweat of someone working to bring their family back from the dead, no matter the sacrifice. And the blood of an innocent.